The morning arrived softly in the small town of Riverside, where the autumn light filtered through ancient oak trees and fell in golden patterns across cobblestone streets that had known 100 years of footsteps, 100 years of quiet hellos and gentle goodbyes. The air carried the scent of wood smoke and distant rain, that particular fragrance of October mornings when the world feels wrapped in a blanket of mist and memory, when everything moves just a little slower, just a little softer, as if the earth itself is preparing for rest. In a small apartment above the old bakery on Elm Street, where the scent of rising dough drifted upward through the floorboards like a daily blessing, a man named Robert awakened to the sound of rain tapping gently against the window pane. He lay there for a moment, listening to that ancient rhythm, that soft percussion that had lulled humans to sleep since the beginning of time, and he felt the familiar weight of tiredness in his bones. The kind of tiredness that comes not from a single day's work, but from years of working, years of carrying things both heavy and light, years of moving through the world with a quiet dignity that asked for nothing and expected even less. Robert was 62 years old, though his face held a softness that made him seem both older and younger at once, as if time had touched him gently, leaving traces of wisdom in the lines around his eyes, but preserving something tender and hopeful in the way he smiled. His hair was silver white, combed carefully each morning with an old wooden comb that had belonged to his father, and his hands were large and weathered, the hands of someone who had worked with them every day of his adult life, hands that knew the weight of mop handles and the texture of worn cotton cleaning rags, hands that had scrubbed floors until they gleamed like still water under moonlight. Along the quiet streets of Riverside, the old buildings stood as they had for decades, their brick facades weathered and kind, their windows catching the first light like half-closed eyes slowly waking. There was a bank on the corner, a modest building with tall windows and brass handles that gleamed despite their age, and it was toward this bank that a figure was slowly making his way through the morning stillness. His name was Robert, though few people in town knew this anymore. To most, he was simply the man who sat outside the grocery store, or the figure who could be seen walking the quiet streets at dawn, his coat too thin for the coming winter, his boots worn down at the heels. He moved with a particular carefulness, the way people move when they have learned that the world does not always make space for them, when they have grown accustomed to being overlooked. His hair was gray, turning white at the temples, and his face held the deep lines of someone who had seen more than most, who had carried weights that left their mark not just on the body, but on the spirit itself. The morning light was gentle on him as he walked, touching the worn fabric of his jacket with something like tenderness. There was a dignity in his bearing that persisted despite everything, a straightness to his spine that spoke of years when he had worn a uniform, when he had stood at attention, when he had been someone people saluted rather than someone they looked away from. In his hand, he carried a small envelope, its edges soft from being held, its contents representing something he had been gathering courage to address for longer than he cared to admit. Inside the bank, the morning preparations were underway with their own quiet rhythm. Helen, the head teller, was arranging her station with the precision of someone who had performed these same motions for 20 years. She aligned her stamp just so, checked her drawer, smoothed her cardigan, and glanced at the clock with satisfaction. 7:45. 15 minutes until opening. The lobby was peaceful in this pre-opening stillness, with light streaming through the tall windows and touching the marble floor in long, golden rectangles. Two younger tellers, Emily and Nathan, were chatting quietly near the back, their voices carrying that particular brightness of people who have not yet learned to measure their words too carefully. They were good people, really, kind in their way, but young enough that they had not yet developed the capacity to see past surfaces, to understand that appearances could be desperately misleading. They laughed at something on Nathan's phone, their voices echoing softly in the quiet space, unaware that their morning was about to offer them a lesson in humility, in recognition, in the dangerous assumptions we make about the people around us. Robert reached the bank's entrance just as the hands of the clock aligned at 8. Through the glass door, he could see the tellers moving about, preparing for the day. He stood for a moment, gathering himself, feeling the weight of the envelope in his hand and the deeper weight of all the years that had brought him to this moment. There was a time when entering a bank would have been unremarkable, just another errand in a day full of ordinary tasks. But that was before the war that had taken more than it gave, before the injury that had ended his career, before the slow, painful unraveling of the life he had built, the marriage that couldn't withstand the strain, the job opportunities that evaporated like morning dew. He took a breath, the kind of deep, steadying breath that combat veterans learn to take before stepping into uncertain territory. And he pulled open the heavy door. The warmth of the bank enveloped him immediately, such a contrast to the cool morning air that he felt it like an embrace. For a moment, he simply stood there, letting the warmth sink into his bones, feeling the comfort of being indoors in a space with solid walls and soft lighting and the promise of order. The lobby was beautiful in its way, with its old-fashioned marble floor and dark wood paneling, its brass fixtures polished to a soft glow. It smelled of paper and polish and that particular scent of a place where money changes hands, where futures are decided, where lives can shift with the stroke of a pen. Helen looked up from her station, her professional smile ready, and then she saw him. She saw the worn jacket, the weathered boots, the too thin frame, and something flickered across her face. Not cruelty, not exactly, but a kind of weariness, a resignation. Her smile didn't quite reach her eyes as she called out, her voice carrying across the quiet lobby with a tone that tried for kindness, but landed somewhere closer to condescension. "Sir, can I help you? Are you looking for something?" Robert approached the counter slowly, his movements careful, measured. He was aware, in the way that people who have been homeless become aware, of how he must appear, of the assumptions being made in the space between where he stood and where the teller sat behind her protective glass. He could feel the other tellers glancing his way, could sense the subtle shift in the atmosphere, the way the air itself seemed to grow more guarded. "Good morning," he said, and his voice was quiet but steady, roughened by weather and time, but still carrying the remnants of command, of authority earned and tested. "I need to access my account, please." There was a pause, brief but weighted. Emily, the younger teller, glanced at Nathan, and something passed between them, a look that Robert had seen too many times to count. Skepticism? Doubt. The kind of judgment that happens in an instant, that calculates worth based on appearances, that decides who belongs and who doesn't before a single word has been spoken. Nathan stepped forward, his smile pleasant, but his eyes wary. "Your account? Sir, are you sure you have an account with us? This is First National Bank of Riverside. Sometimes people get the banks confused." "I'm not confused," Robert said gently, with infinite patience. The patience of someone who has learned to expect doubt, to meet it with calm rather than anger. "I've had an account here for 32 years. I'd like to access it, please." Helen's expression softened slightly. Not quite believing, but willing to go through the motions, to treat this as a teaching moment, perhaps. A chance to redirect this confused soul to wherever he actually needed to be. "Of course, sir. Do you have your account number? Or perhaps some identification?" Robert reached into his jacket, a slow movement so as not to alarm anyone, and pulled out a worn wallet. From it, he extracted a driver's license, expired now for several years, and a small, laminated card, yellowed with age. He placed them on the counter with care, the gestures of someone handling precious things. The tellers gathered closer, their curiosity overcoming their wariness. Helen picked up the card, squinting at it in the soft light. It was an old account card, the kind banks used to issue before everything became digital, before passwords and security questions and two-factor authentication. The numbers were faded but legible, written in the careful hand of a bank employee from decades past. "Robert James Mitchell," Helen read aloud, and something in her voice had changed, a note of uncertainty creeping in. She turned to her computer, her fingers moving across the keyboard with practiced efficiency. The screen glowed softly in the morning light, casting a pale blue reflection on her face as she searched the system. The moment stretched, quiet, and suspended. Robert stood patiently, his hands resting on the counter, his breathing slow and even. He had learned patience in the hardest of schools, had learned to wait through cold nights and empty days, had learned that rushing never made the world move faster for people like him. Around him, the bank was waking fully now, other employees arriving, the first few customers of the day beginning to trickle in, their footsteps soft on the marble floor. Helen's expression changed as she stared at her screen. Her eyebrows rose slowly, her mouth opening slightly, her professional composure cracking just enough to reveal genuine surprise. She leaned closer to the monitor, as if proximity might change what she was seeing, might make the numbers resolve into something more expected, more explicable. Mr. Mitchell, she said slowly, and now her voice held a different quality entirely, respect threading through the surprise. I see your account here. Could you hold on one moment, please? I need to verify something with my manager. She stood, moving with sudden purpose toward the office at the back of the lobby, and Robert could see her through the glass walls, speaking with a man in a dark suit, gesturing toward the lobby, toward where Robert stood. The manager, a man named James, who had worked at this bank for 15 years but who had never noticed the homeless veteran who sometimes sat on the bench across the street, looked up with interest. Emily and Nathan exchanged glances, their earlier amusement fading into something more complex, more uncomfortable. They had laughed, quietly, privately, when Robert first walked in. They had made assumptions, quick and thoughtless, the kind of assumptions young people make when they have never known hardship themselves, when they have never had to understand that a person's worth is not written in the quality of their clothes or the roof over their head. The manager emerged from his office, his expression carefully neutral, professionally courteous, and approached Robert with an extended hand. Mr. Mitchell? I'm James Crawford, the branch manager. I understand you're here to access your account? Robert shook his hand, a firm grip despite everything, the handshake of a man who had once led soldiers, who had once signed important documents, who had once been someone people listened to. Yes, sir. I know it's been some time since I've made a transaction, but I need to access my funds. James nodded slowly, his mind already working through the implications, through the protocols for dormant accounts, through the question of how a man who appeared to be homeless could have any significant funds at all. Of course, let's step into my office where we can discuss this more privately. Helen, could you pull up Mr. Mitchell's complete account history? They moved through the lobby, past the other customers who had begun to form a line, past the tellers who watched with unconcealed curiosity. The office was quiet, carpeted, warm, with a large desk and comfortable chairs and family photos arranged on the credenza. James gestured for Robert to sit, and Robert lowered himself into the chair with care, feeling the softness of the cushion, the support of the armrests, small comforts that had become luxuries. Helen appeared with a printed report, multiple pages that she handed to James with an expression that suggested she still couldn't quite believe what she was seeing. James took the papers, his eyes scanning the numbers, and Robert watched as the manager's face shifted through a series of subtle transformations. Surprise, confusion, something approaching awe. Mr. Mitchell, James said carefully, setting the papers down and meeting Robert's eyes directly. According to our records, your account has been dormant for approximately 8 years. Before that, you were making regular monthly deposits. The account has continued to accrue interest during this time. The current balance... He paused, as if needing to verify one more time that what he was about to say was actually true. The current balance is $847,312. The number hung in the air between them, impossible and real, a figure that represented years of careful saving, of automatic deposits, of military pay and veterans' benefits and disability payments all funneling into an account that Robert had been too lost, too overwhelmed, too broken to access. The money had sat there, safe behind the walls of the bank, growing with interest, waiting with the infinite patience that only money can have, while its owner had slept under bridges and in shelters, had gone hungry, had worn clothes until they fell apart. James continued, his voice gentler now, understanding beginning to dawn. I see that the deposits were primarily from military and VA sources. Mr. Mitchell, may I ask, have you been unable to access this account? Is there something we could have done to help you? Robert was quiet for a long moment, his hands folded in his lap, his gaze distant. How to explain? How to put into words the way trauma can disconnect a person from their own life, the way PTSD can make the simplest tasks feel insurmountable, the way depression can convince you that you don't deserve comfort, don't deserve help, don't deserve to reach out and claim what is yours? How to explain the shame that had kept him from walking through these doors, the sense that he had failed so completely that he had forfeited his right to normalcy, to dignity, to the life that account balance represented. I got lost, he said finally, and his voice was soft, honest, raw with truth. After I came back from overseas, after my injury, after my wife left, I got lost. Some days I couldn't remember simple things. Some days I couldn't face people, the account, the money. It felt like it belonged to a different person, someone I used to be, someone I couldn't find my way back to. James nodded slowly, his own eyes dampening slightly. He was a father, had a son who had served in Afghanistan, and he understood, perhaps better than most, what service could cost, what coming home could mean. I'm sorry we didn't reach out sooner. For dormant accounts, we send notices to the last known address, but if you weren't receiving mail... I wasn't receiving anything, Robert confirmed. No address to send to. No phone to call. I'd see the bank sometimes, walking past, and I'd think about coming in, but it seemed impossible, like walking into a different world, a world I didn't belong to anymore. They sat together in the quiet office, two men on different sides of a desk, but connected in that moment by honesty, by recognition, by the understanding that life could break people in ways that had nothing to do with their worth or their strength. Outside the office, the bank continued its morning rhythm, customers coming and going, transactions being processed, the ordinary business of money flowing from one place to another. Mr. Mitchell, James said gently, this is your money. You earned it. You deserve it. Whatever you need, whatever would help you, please let us know. We can set up whatever accounts or services you require. We can help you access these funds safely and practically. Robert looked down at his hands, weathered and scarred, and felt something shift inside him. It wasn't dramatic, wasn't like a door being flung open or a light being switched on. It was quieter than that, subtler, like the first thaw after a long winter, like the moment when you realize you've been holding your breath and you finally, slowly let it out. I'd like to get a hotel room, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. A warm place to sleep, some new clothes, some decent food, and then I need to figure out what comes next. James smiled, genuine warmth in his expression. We can do that. We can absolutely do that. Let me set you up with immediate access. We'll get you a new debit card, process it as a rush, so you'll have it by tomorrow. For today, I can authorize a temporary withdrawal so you have cash on hand. The practical discussions unfolded with careful detail, James walking Robert through options, explaining interest rates and investment possibilities, but never pushing, never suggesting that Robert needed to make all the decisions right now. There would be time, James assured him. Time to plan, time to think, time to rebuild. The money had waited 8 years. It could wait a little longer while Robert found his footing. As they worked through the paperwork, as Robert signed documents with a hand that trembled slightly from emotion rather than cold, Helen appeared at the office door. Mr. Crawford, the staff was wondering. We'd like to apologize to Mr. Mitchell for our initial reception. We should have treated him better. James looked at Robert, raising an eyebrow in question, and Robert nodded slowly. They returned to the lobby together, and Robert found the tellers gathered there, Emily and Nathan among them, their faces holding genuine remorse. The morning's casual judgment had been replaced by something deeper, more thoughtful, the uncomfortable recognition of their own assumptions. Emily stepped forward first, her young face earnest. Mr. Mitchell, I'm so sorry. I made judgments I had no right to make. You deserved our respect, regardless of how you looked or what we thought we knew. I'm truly sorry. Nathan nodded, his earlier cockiness completely absent. I was wrong. I was completely wrong. I'm sorry, sir. Thank you for your service, and I'm sorry we didn't honor it better. Robert looked at them, these young people learning a hard lesson, and he felt no anger, no resentment, just a kind of tired understanding. You're not bad people, he said gently. You just didn't know. Most people don't. We see what we expect to see. But maybe now you'll look a little deeper next time. Maybe you'll remember that everyone has a story, everyone has worth, regardless of what shows on the surface. The rest of the day unfolded with a dreamlike quality, Robert moving through tasks that would have been ordinary for anyone else but felt momentous to him. James personally drove him to a nearby hotel, a nice one with soft beds and room service and windows that looked out over the autumn trees. He helped Robert check in, made sure he had everything he needed, left him with phone numbers and promises to follow up the next day. Alone in the hotel room, Robert stood for a long moment simply looking around. The bed was enormous, covered in white linens that looked impossibly clean. The bathroom had towels, thick and soft. Toiletries arranged neatly by the sink. The air was warm, climate-controlled, steady. He turned on the shower, watched the steam rise, felt the water run hot and strong, and then he stepped under it and let it wash over him. 8 years of streets and shelters and cold nights sluicing away, spiraling down the drain. That evening, wearing new clothes purchased at a nearby shop with the cash James had helped him withdraw, Robert sat in the hotel restaurant and ordered a meal. Not from a value menu, not the cheapest thing available, but something he actually wanted. Salmon with roasted vegetables, a glass of wine, bread still warm from the oven. When the food arrived, he ate slowly, savoring each bite, aware of the miracle of warmth and plenty, of safety and comfort. Outside the window, darkness was falling on Riverside, the streetlights coming on one by one, casting pools of golden light on the sidewalks he had walked so many times. He thought about where he would be tonight if he hadn't found the courage to walk through those bank doors, if he had continued to let fear and shame keep him from claiming what was his. He thought about all the other people out there still lost, still struggling, still unable to bridge the gap between where they were and where they needed to be. And he thought about tomorrow, about next week, about the months and years ahead. He had money now, yes, more than enough to secure housing, to rebuild his life in practical terms. But he also had something more precious, harder won. He had taken the first step. He had walked through those doors. He had faced the judgment and the doubt and moved through it. And that courage, that choice, that was something no bank balance could have bought him. That was his own. As he finished his meal and returned to his room, as he settled into the soft bed and pulled the clean covers up, as sleep began to find him for the first time in years without cold or fear or uncertainty, Robert Mitchell felt something he had almost forgotten existed. Hope. Gentle, tentative, fragile as a candle flame, but real. Real and growing stronger. The story of what happened at First National Bank that morning would spread through Riverside in the days that followed, taking on different shapes as stories do, growing in some tellings, shrinking in others, but always carrying the same essential truth. A homeless veteran had walked in, had been judged and dismissed, and had revealed that appearances meant nothing, that assumptions could be devastatingly wrong, that dignity and worth existed independent of circumstances. But for Robert, lying in the dark hotel room with the warm blankets pulled up to his chin, listening to the quiet hum of the heating system, feeling the softness of the pillow beneath his head, the story was simpler, more personal. It was about finding the courage to claim yourself, to decide that you deserved comfort and safety and basic human dignity, even when the world had spent years suggesting otherwise. It was about the long, slow journey back to yourself, one step at a time. And tonight, in this warm room, with money in the bank and a future that was no longer foreclosed, Robert took a deep breath and let himself rest. Really rest. For the first time in so very long. The morning came to him gently, sunlight filtering through curtains he had pulled closed the night before, soft and diffuse, carrying none of the harsh urgency of dawn on the streets. For several moments after waking, Robert lay still, his eyes closed, letting himself simply feel the comfort of the bed, the warmth of the room, the absence of cold or pain or the need to be, immediately alert for danger. This was a gift, he understood, this slow waking, this luxury of time. On the streets, morning meant movement, meant finding a warm place before the police moved you along, meant figuring out where the next meal might come from. Here, morning meant only the gentle suggestion that a new day had arrived, and he could greet it at his own pace. When he finally opened his eyes, the room resolved around him in soft focus. The beige walls and dark wood furniture, the TV mounted above the dresser, the armchair by the window, everything was clean, ordered, safe. He sat up slowly, his body remembering the softness of the mattress, and walked to the window, pulling back the curtain to look out at Riverside bathed in morning light. The town looked different from this height, from this warmth. The streets he had walked so many times were busy with morning commuters, people heading to work with coffee cups and briefcases, moving through their routines with the comfortable automaticity of people whose lives were predictable, stable. He had been one of them once, so long ago it felt like a different lifetime. Could he be again? The question hung in his mind, not urgent, not demanding, just quietly present. The phone on the nightstand rang, startling him. He picked it up cautiously, still not quite used to the idea of anyone having a reason to call him. "Mr. Mitchell, good morning. It's James Crawford from the bank. I hope I'm not calling too early. I wanted to check in, see how you're settling in, and let you know your debit card will be ready by this afternoon. I could bring it by the hotel if that's convenient." Robert felt a warmth spread through his chest, the simple kindness of being checked on, of having someone care whether he was all right. "That would be fine, thank you. I'm doing well, better than I have in a long time." "I'm glad to hear it. I'll see you around 2 o'clock then. And Mr. Mitchell, if you need anything at all, please don't hesitate to call the bank. We're here to help." After the call ended, Robert ordered breakfast from room service, another small miracle. When it arrived, wheeled in on a cart by a cheerful young woman who wished him a good morning without a trace of judgment or pity, he sat by the window and ate slowly. Scrambled eggs, perfectly seasoned. Toast with real butter, fresh fruit. Coffee that was hot and strong. Each bite felt like an affirmation, like the world telling him, yes, you deserve this. You are allowed to have comfort and plenty. He spent the morning in simple activities that felt momentous in their ordinariness. A long, hot shower. Shaving carefully at the bathroom mirror, watching his face emerge from beneath the overgrown beard, seeing a man he barely recognized but who was, unmistakably, himself. He brushed his teeth with the hotel toothbrush, the minty freshness almost overwhelming after so long. He dressed in his new clothes, still stiff and unfamiliar but clean, intact, appropriate. Looking at himself in the mirror, clean and dressed and warm, Robert felt emotion rise in his throat. This was what dignity looked like. This was what it meant to be afforded basic human comfort. And the fact that he had the resources now to maintain this, to not slip back into cold and hunger and uncertainty, felt like a reprieve, like being pulled back from the edge of an abyss he had been circling for so long. James arrived at 2 o'clock exactly as promised, carrying an envelope and a warm smile. They sat in the armchairs by the window, and James walked Robert through the new debit card, the PIN number, the way to check his balance, the protections that were in place. "I've also taken the liberty of setting up a meeting for you tomorrow, if you're interested," James said, his tone careful, respectful of Robert's autonomy. "There's a veteran services coordinator in the county, Linda Harper. She's excellent at helping veterans navigate benefits, housing assistance, counseling services, whatever might be helpful. I thought you might want to connect with her, but of course it's completely up to you." Robert considered this, turning it over in his mind. Part of him wanted to retreat, to simply enjoy this newfound security without reaching out, without making himself vulnerable to systems and bureaucracies and the potential for more disappointment. But another part, the part that had found courage yesterday to walk into that bank, knew that James was offering him something important, a path forward, a way to not just survive, but rebuild. "I'd like that," Robert said quietly. "Yes, I'd like to meet with her." James smiled, genuine pleasure in his expression. "Wonderful. I'll coordinate with her office. And Robert. May I call you Robert? I want you to know what happened yesterday at the bank, the way you were initially treated. That's not who we are. Or rather, it's not who we want to be. I've already scheduled training for our staff on recognizing and addressing our biases, on treating every customer with equal dignity regardless of appearance. You've given us an opportunity to be better. Thank you for that." After James left, Robert sat for a long time by the window, watching the afternoon light shift across the buildings across the street, watching people come and go, watching life flow past in its endless stream. He thought about the meeting tomorrow, about what it might mean to formally connect with veteran services, to begin the process of not just surviving, but thriving. The thought was both exciting and terrifying. Hope and fear intermingled in that complex way that all significant choices inspire. That evening, he ventured out of the hotel for the first time since checking in. The autumn air was cool against his face, carrying the scent of fallen leaves and wood smoke from someone's fireplace. He walked slowly through the downtown, not heading anywhere particular, just moving, feeling the freedom of walking for pleasure rather than necessity of being able to return to warmth and safety whenever he chose. He passed the grocery store where he used to sit and saw someone else there now, a younger man with a cardboard sign and a tired expression. Robert stopped, reached into his wallet, and pulled out several $20 bills. He approached quietly, not wanting to startle, and held them out. The young man looked up, surprise and wariness in his eyes. "I don't need pity," he said, defensive in the way people get when they've been looked through too many times. "Not pity," Robert said gently, "just one traveler helping another. I was where you are. It gets better, sometimes in ways you can't predict, but you have to keep going." He pressed the money into the young man's hand and walked on before there could be thanks or questions, feeling the strange, full-circle nature of the moment, the way help given creates invisible threads between people, the way suffering survived can become wisdom offered. That night, back in the hotel room, Robert made a phone call he had been avoiding thinking about, the number coming to him from memory despite the years. It rang 4 times before a familiar voice answered, cautious, uncertain. "Hello?" "Sarah," Robert said, his voice catching slightly. "It's your father." There was a long pause, and Robert could hear his daughter's breath catch, could feel the complicated weight of years and hurt and misunderstanding flowing through the phone line. "Dad? Where are you? I tried to find you after Mom told me, after I heard you were... I tried." "I know," Robert said softly. "I know you did. I wasn't ready to be found. But I am now. I'm okay now. Better than okay. I have some things to tell you, sweetheart. Some things to explain. And some amends to make, if you'll let me." They talked for over an hour, words spilling out in fits and starts, explanations and apologies and tears on both ends. Sarah was in Portland now, working as a teacher, married with 2 children Robert had never met. The grandchildren he hadn't known existed. The life that had continued while he had been lost in his own darkness. "I'd like to come visit," Robert said finally, "if that would be all right. I'd like to meet your family. I'd like to try to be part of your life again, if you'll have me." "I'd like that too, Dad," Sarah said, her voice thick with emotion. "I've missed you. We've all missed you. There's been this hole, you know? We didn't know if you were alive or..." Her voice broke, unable to finish. "I'm alive," Robert said firmly. "I'm alive and I'm coming back. Not just existing, but actually living. And I want you to be part of that, if you're willing." After they hung up, Robert sat in the darkened room, looking out at the lights of Riverside, feeling the weight and gift of reconnection, of family ties that had frayed but not broken, that could perhaps be rewoven with time and patience and love. The money in the bank mattered, yes, but this mattered more. This was the real wealth, the real treasure he had almost lost forever. The meeting with Linda Harper the next morning was held in a quiet office downtown, in a building dedicated to veteran services. Linda was in her 50s, with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor that immediately put Robert at ease. She had been a military nurse, she explained, and understood both the pride and the struggles of service. "Robert," she said, after listening to his story with careful attention, taking notes but mostly just being present, witnessing, "you're not alone in what you've experienced. The numbers of veterans experiencing homelessness, dealing with PTSD and service-related injuries, it's staggering. But the good news is that you're taking steps now. You're reaching out. That's the hardest part." She walked him through options systematically, without rushing, respecting his agency at every step. There were counseling services available, specialized in treating PTSD and service-related trauma. There were support groups where he could connect with other veterans who understood. There were programs to help with housing, though given his financial situation, that was less urgent now. What mattered, Linda emphasized, was building a support network, creating connections that would help him stay grounded as he rebuilt his life. "The money is wonderful," she said frankly. "It gives you security, options, breathing room. But healing isn't about money. It's about addressing the wounds that led to being on the streets in the first place. It's about learning to forgive yourself, to accept help, to believe that you deserve the life you're building." Robert found himself nodding, feeling seen in a way he hadn't expected. "I've been so ashamed," he admitted quietly, "of ending up where I was, of not being stronger, not being able to just cope better." Linda's expression was infinitely compassionate. "Shame is heavy, and it lies. The fact that you struggled doesn't make you weak. It makes you human. You survived war, you survived injury, you survived loss and homelessness and 8 years of hardship. Robert, you're one of the strongest people I've met. Now you just need to learn to be as kind to yourself as you're learning to let others be kind to you." They set up a schedule, weekly counseling sessions with a therapist who specialized in veteran trauma, a support group that met Tuesday evenings, follow-up appointments with Linda herself to check in on progress and address any needs that arose. Robert left the office with a folder full of information and a feeling of being held, supported, part of a system that actually wanted to help rather than judge. Over the following weeks, Robert's life began to take on new shape and structure. He found an apartment, a small one-bedroom in a quiet part of town with big windows that let in morning light, and a kitchen where he could cook simple meals. He furnished it slowly, carefully, choosing each item with attention, creating a space that felt safe and his own. A comfortable couch, a good bed with soft sheets, a reading chair by the window, plants that needed tending, giving him something to care for, to keep alive. He began attending the support group, finding unexpected comfort in the company of other veterans, men and women who understood without needing explanation, who had fought their own battles with readjustment and trauma and loss. They met in a community center basement, sitting in a circle of folding chairs, drinking bad coffee and speaking truths that would have been impossible to voice anywhere else. There was William, who had served in Vietnam and struggled with addiction for decades before finding stability. There was Jennifer, who had been an army medic and carried the weight of lives she couldn't save. There was Michael, whose name made Robert think of his middle name, who had lost both legs in Iraq and was learning to navigate the world differently. They welcomed Robert without ceremony, without pity, just the simple acceptance of one warrior recognizing another. "It gets easier," William told him one evening after group, the two of them lingering in the parking lot, not quite ready to go home to their respective solitudes. "Not perfect, not fixed, but easier. You learn to carry it differently. The weight doesn't get lighter, but you get stronger." Robert nodded, understanding. He was learning that healing wasn't about erasing the past, about becoming the person he had been before trauma and loss. It was about integration, about learning to hold both the pain and the hope, about building a life that acknowledged the scars while refusing to be defined entirely by them. His therapy sessions with Dr. Catherine Reynolds became anchors in his week, hours carved out, to sit in a comfortable office and do the difficult work of processing, of remembering, of slowly untangling the knots of trauma and shame that had bound him for so long. Dr. Reynolds was patient, never pushing, but gently persistent, helping him see patterns, recognize triggers, develop tools for managing the waves of emotion that still sometimes threatened to overwhelm. "You've built significant protective walls," she observed during one session. "They kept you safe when you needed them. Now we're learning that it's safe to lower them sometimes, to let people in, to accept that you deserve connection and care." Robert was also, slowly, carefully, rebuilding his relationship with his daughter. They spoke on the phone regularly, long conversations that sometimes flowed easily and sometimes felt stilted, awkward, both of them learning how to be father and daughter again after so many years of absence. Sarah sent photos of the grandchildren, Sophie and Lucas, and Robert kept them on his refrigerator, looking at them every morning. These beautiful children who carried his blood, who he hoped to know. In December, 3 months after walking into the bank, Robert flew to Portland for Christmas. It was his first time on a plane in over a decade, and the experience felt surreal, suspended in air above the clouds, traveling in hours a distance that would have once taken weeks of walking. Sarah met him at the airport, and for a long moment they just stood there looking at each other before Sarah pulled him into a fierce hug. "I'm sorry," Robert said, the words he had been carrying. "I'm just glad you're here," Sarah replied. "That's all that matters now. You're here." Meeting his son-in-law, Marcus, and the grandchildren was both joyful and painful, a reminder of all the time he had lost, all the moments he had missed. But they welcomed him with open hearts, the children curious and sweet, asking questions with the unfiltered directness of the young. "Why were you lost, Grandpa?" Sophie asked, and Robert knelt down to her level, looking into her serious 5-year-old eyes. "Sometimes adults get hurt in ways you can't see," he said gently, "and it takes time to heal, but I'm better now, and I'm so happy to meet you." She considered this gravely, then threw her arms around his neck. "I'm happy you're better." The week in Portland was full of gentle moments. Playing with the children, teaching Lucas how to build a simple birdhouse, watching old movies with Sarah and Marcus in their warm living room, being part of a family again. On Christmas morning, sitting among wrapping paper and new toys and the chaos of children excited about presents, Robert felt tears slide down his face, overwhelmed by the simple miracle of being here, of being part of this, of having been given another chance. "Thank you," he said to Sarah later, the two of them sitting on the back deck in the quiet after everyone else had gone to bed, nursing cups of coffee and looking at the Portland lights spreading below them. "For not giving up on me, for keeping the door open even when I couldn't walk through it." Sarah reached over, squeezed his hand. "You're my dad. That doesn't change, no matter what. I'm just grateful to have you back." Returning to Riverside after the visit, Robert felt both the ache of separation and the deep satisfaction of reconnection. He had roots again, connections, people who cared whether he was all right. The apartment was cold when he opened the door, but he turned up the heat, made himself tea, sat in his reading chair, and felt the profound comfort of having a home to come back to. January brought new routines, new goals. Robert enrolled in a class at the community college, a literature course that met twice a week. He had always loved reading, had carried books in his rucksack during deployments, had spent cold library hours during his homeless years escaping into stories. Now he could study formally, discuss ideas with other students, write essays that his professor, a kind woman named Dr. Martinez, praised for their insight and emotional honesty. He also began volunteering at a homeless shelter downtown, helping serve meals and offering quiet conversation to the men and women who came through the doors. He never shared his story unless asked, never positioned himself as someone who had made it out in a way that might feel condescending. He just showed up, steady and present, offering what he could, a warm meal, a listening ear, sometimes money slipped discreetly to someone who needed it. "Why do you do this?" one of the other volunteers asked him one evening, curious about this quiet man who came so regularly, who seemed to understand the residents in a way that suggested personal experience. "Because I remember what it meant when people saw me," Robert said simply. "Really saw me, as a person with dignity and worth. I want to offer that to others." Spring came gently to Riverside, the trees budding and greening, the air warming, the light lengthening. Robert had been in his apartment for 6 months now, attending therapy, going to group, staying connected with Sarah and the grandchildren through regular calls and video chats. He had made friends in his college class, had coffee regularly with a retired teacher named Dorothy, who had become a warm presence in his life. He had also gradually begun to forgive himself. This was perhaps the hardest work, harder than finding housing or rebuilding family connections or managing his finances. It was learning to look at himself with compassion rather than judgment, to accept that his years on the streets didn't make him a failure, didn't erase his value, didn't define the totality of who he was. "You did the best you could with what you had," Dr. Reynolds told him in one of their sessions. "That's all any of us can do. The fact that you survived, that you're here now, that's not something to be ashamed of. That's something to be proud of." One warm April afternoon, Robert returned to First National Bank. He had no particular business there. His accounts were set up, his finances stable. He just wanted to visit, to see the place where his new life had begun, to say thank you. James Crawford was in his office and welcomed Robert warmly, clearly pleased to see him. They chatted for a while, Robert sharing updates about his apartment, his classes, his family reconciliation. James listened with genuine interest, his face lighting up with each piece of good news. "I can't tell you how glad I am to hear all this," James said. "You know, that day you came in, it changed something in this branch. We all talk about it still, about assumptions, about dignity, about really seeing people. You taught us something important." Emily, the young teller who had been one of the first to judge Robert, appeared at the office door. She had asked to speak with Robert, James explained, if he had a moment. Robert nodded, and she entered, nervous but determined. "Mr. Mitchell," she began, "I wanted to tell you that what happened that morning, it stayed with me. I've thought about it almost every day since. I've tried to do better, to look deeper, to question my assumptions. I joined a volunteer program at the Veterans Center because of you. I wanted to understand better, to help if I could. I just wanted you to know that you changed something in me, made me want to be better." Robert felt his throat tighten with emotion. "Thank you for telling me that, and thank you for learning from it, for growing. That's all we can do, really. Learn and try to do better." Walking out of the bank that afternoon, Robert paused on the sidewalk, looking up at the building, at the brass handles that gleamed in the sunlight, at the windows that reflected the blue spring sky. This place, this ordinary bank in a small town, had been the threshold between his old life and his new one. The moment he had walked through those doors, everything had shifted. But it wasn't really the money that had changed things, he understood now. The money had provided security, had removed the immediate crises of hunger and cold and homelessness. But the real change had come from something deeper, from the decision to believe he deserved help, from the courage to reach out, from the willingness to accept kindness, from the slow, patient work of healing. As summer arrived, Robert made plans to visit Portland again, this time staying longer, getting to know his grandchildren more deeply, being present for Sophie's 6th birthday and Lucas's first day of kindergarten. He and Sarah talked about maybe taking a trip together, just the two of them, going camping or fishing or doing something that would let them reconnect as adults, without the weight of all the years of separation hanging quite so heavily between them. He continued his work at the shelter, his classes at the college, his therapy and group attendance. He had planted a small garden outside his apartment, tomatoes and herbs and flowers, tending them carefully, finding peace in the simple acts of watering and weeding, of encouraging growth. The garden became a meditation, a metaphor. Give things what they need, create the right conditions, be patient, and growth will come. Slowly, sometimes imperceptibly, but inevitably. One evening in late June, Robert sat on his small balcony watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple. He had a cup of coffee in his hand, still warm, and a book on his lap that he had been reading for one of his classes. The air was soft, carrying the scent of summer grass and the distant sound of children playing in a nearby yard. Everything was ordinary, peaceful, quiet, and in that ordinariness, Robert felt something bloom in his chest, something that had been absent for so long he had almost forgotten its existence. Contentment. Not happiness exactly, not joy or excitement or any of the more dramatic emotions. Just contentment. The simple, profound satisfaction of being okay, of being safe, of being home. He thought about the man he had been a year ago, sleeping under bridges, convinced he had lost everything, including himself. He thought about the courage it had taken to walk into that bank, to face judgment and doubt, to claim what was his. He thought about all the small steps since then, the therapy sessions and support group meetings and difficult conversations and moments of vulnerability and growth. It had been hard. It was still hard some days. The trauma didn't just disappear because he had money in the bank and a roof over his head. There were still nights when nightmares woke him, still moments when anxiety threatened to overwhelm, still days when the weight of the past felt almost too heavy to carry. But he was carrying it. And more than that, he was learning to set it down sometimes, to rest, to let others help him hold the weight. He was learning that strength wasn't about bearing everything alone, wasn't about never breaking, but about having the courage to break, and then the patience to heal. As darkness settled over Riverside and stars began to appear in the deepening sky, Robert finished his coffee and went inside. He washed the cup, completed his small evening routine, brushed his teeth, changed into comfortable pajamas. He climbed into his bed, pulling the soft covers up, feeling the comfort of the mattress, the safety of the walls around him, the peace of knowing he would sleep warm and undisturbed. Before turning out the light, he looked at the photograph on his nightstand, the one of Sarah and Marcus and the grandchildren, all of them smiling at the camera. His family. The connections he had thought lost forever, but which had been waiting, patient as his bank account, for him to be ready to claim them. "Thank you," he whispered into the quiet room, a prayer or acknowledgement or simple statement of gratitude to whatever force or chance or grace had brought him through the darkness and into this light. Then he switched off the lamp and settled into the darkness, not the cold, frightening darkness of the streets, but the warm, comfortable darkness of a safe room in a home that was his. And as sleep came to him, gentle and slow, Robert Mitchell knew with absolute certainty that he was going to be okay. Not perfect, not unmarked by what he had survived, but okay, healing, growing, connected, home. The past couldn't be changed, but the future was unwritten, and for the first time in so very long, that thought brought not fear but hope. Tomorrow would come, as it always did, but he would meet it here, warm and safe, with people who cared about him, and a life worth living. And that, Robert thought as consciousness drifted away into peaceful sleep, was more than enough. That was everything. The end came not with drama, but with gentleness, not with resolution, but with continuation, because healing is not a destination but a journey, Not an ending, but an opening. Not a door that closes, but a window that stays open, letting in light and air and the promise of all the tomorrows yet to come. And in that small apartment in Riverside, in that warm bed, in that safe room, Robert Mitchell slept and dreamed and healed and lived.